Downstairs either. Okay, good evening, everybody. Yashar koach, well done to everybody who made it here today in these conditions. I want to talk about a question, a very practical halachic question that comes up. Everybody has encountered it. Not everybody realizes that it's actually a halachic question at all. We spoke about it once briefly in one of the Tzurba Shiurim, Tzurba Rabbanan. I know people like to come out with the bottom line, what the practical halacha is. So we'll talk about a little bit more now. Maybe some things we didn't say there, and not everybody was at that shiur. And it's connected to this week's parasha. So why I thought about this is because the other day, I went to pick up my daughter from Gan. So they have an exhibition. They've been learning about space and learning about planets, the sun, the moon, the stars, etc. So there's a corner of the Gan that's set up. They've got pictures on the walls of all the sun and the moon and the planets. They've got these little, I won't say sculptures, but these drawings which they've made 3D sort of models of the planets, etc. And that is not a simple thing. That is not a straightforward matter halachically at all. And the poskim discuss it. It's learned out from this week's parasha. We have after the Aseret Dibrot, towards the end of Parashat Yitro, the Torah tells us, "Lo tasuniti eloi kesef eloi zahav." Right? You will not make with me. Lo tasun iti eloi kesef eloi zahav, gods of silver and gods of gold, images, sculptures, etc. And Chazal learn out from the fact that Pasuk says, Lo tasun iti, you won't make, Hashem says, don't make with me, so the things which are with me, as it were. It says, Lo tasun kidmut shimshai, like those things which serve me, the heavenly celestial bodies. And from here we learn, obviously, if one is making these images, one is making these sculptures in order to worship them, in order to make them as gods, that is clearly going to be forbidden. That is clearly an issue of Avodah Zarah. But this prohibition goes further. Even if it is not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, right, to make images, to make sculptures, to make drawings perhaps of the celestial bodies, sun, moon, and stars, not so clear that is permitted or why that should be permitted. By the way, I'll mention Rabbeinu Bachaya, it's not directly related, but Rabbeinu Bachaya has an amazing perush on this pasuk.
These called drawings of the planets.
Right. So from the fact that it says Lo tasun, no, so the focus is on the first three words of the pasuk. It says
another word. Not allowed to do what?
Correct. So you're not allowed to make any sort of sculptures, any sort of gold and silver, etc. The truth is, we've already seen it. The Torah repeats it. Already seen in the Aseret Dibrot. So no. So there's an extra thing. So it's Chazal say again. The limud is Lo tasun iti, Lo tasun kidmut shimshai. Don't make the things which serve me. From that, what are the shimshai? Those are the different celestial bodies. We'll explain in a moment. The Rambam explains this. But the Rabbeinu Bachaya says on the pasuk, an amazing perush. He says, Lo tasun iti Elohei chesed ve'Elohei zahav. He says, when you are iti, when you are with me, right? Think about me. Think about what you're doing. Think about Torah. Think about Tefillah. Don't at that time. How many people, when they say Lo tasun iti, when you are meant to be with me, you're meant to be thinking of Torah. You're meant to be thinking of Tefillah. What are you thinking of? Elohei chesed ve'Elohei zahav. Your gods of silver, your gods of gold, your money, your material things. That's what takes over. That's what becomes the priority. Says Rabbeinu Bachaya, Lo tasun iti, Elohei chesed ve'Elohei zahav. Forget about those gods of silver and gold. Think about me. That's a drush. It's a very, very nice drush. Rabbeinu Bachaya gives on the pasuk. But again, getting back to our halachic question of whether you can make these images, whether you can make these drawings, sculptures, etc. So the Rambam, just for the fact that it says Dmut Shimshai, the Rambam in Avodah Zarah, right, the famous Rambam, very, very long and elaborate, where he goes on and explains where Avodah Zarah comes from. How did it come into the world? He says, so it happened at the beginning, going back in the days of Enosh, right? Or initially people were worshiping God. Then people said, just like you worship the king, you worship the You give honor to the king. You give honor to his ministers and his sarim, etc. So these are sarim, right? The sun, the moon, the stars, the celestial bodies. We should give them honor as well as a way of giving honor to God. And then people just forgot about God. So they started giving them honor and started worshiping them. And that's where it comes from. So in order to distance all of these things, the Torah says, don't even make images. Don't even make these drawings as well. By the way, there's a related sugya here, which is in terms of making images and making sculptures of people. That has its own parameters and its own discussion. We won't get into it now. But so, first of all, there is a difference between, throughout the sugya, we see in the Gemara, there's a difference between whether these images are 2D versus 3D. Whether you're talking about making an actual 3D sculpture versus making a 2D drawing. The truth is that the Shulchan Aruch seems to follow the opinion of the Rishonim. Many Rishonim that say when it comes to sun, moon, stars, heavenly bodies, even if it's 2D, it's still going to be prohibited. There's still going to be a concern there. And there are two different concerns. There's two different prohibitions, I should say. Number one, in terms of making these images, making the drawings or making the sculptures, that is going to be one issur. Then there is a lower level of issur, not of making these images, but of keeping them, of maintaining them, right? And that is going to be, the Gemara tells us, the problem over there is chashad. The problem over there is suspicion, that even if you didn't make it, but you have it, it was given to you as a gift, or somebody gave you this picture, gave you a book that has these pictures in, could you keep it? So there's a concern, a rabbinic concern of chashad, that we might think that somebody is worshipping Avodah Zarah as a result. Chokhmat Adam says, when it is clear and where it is obvious to everybody that there is no chashad, that wouldn't be a concern. Now he says that about sculptures of people. He says nowadays everybody knows you have these little statues or these little models of people. People know you don't worship them; they're not gods. You could keep them. Presumably, he would say the same thing about sun, moon, and stars. I didn't see him say anything explicitly about that, but presumably it would be the same. So, in B'Maariv Bazak, in volume 7, I think it was, Chelik Zayin, this question was asked by, I think it was a school teacher in Canada, who asked if these drawings could be made, etc. So the tshuva there goes through, and it says, it lists the conditions, whether they can or can't. It says, ideally, you shouldn't, if you don't have any of the mitigating factors, which we'll discuss in a moment. But it says, if you don't have any of those mitigating factors, you shouldn't make them. It says, nonetheless, it says, those who do, we find this expression many times in the poskim. Sometimes you have something which, strictly speaking, shouldn't be allowed. You look at the pshat of the sugya, you look at the pshat of the pasuk and the poskim and the Shulchan Aruch. It's not, like I said, it's not straightforward. It shouldn't be that we should be drawing pictures of the sun, moon, and stars. But many people do it. It seems to be, for whatever reason, people are very lenient about it. And therefore, we can find ways, reasons of limud zchut. Rav Kook writes us as well. Rav Kook, in one of his tshuvot, that Kohen, he says that when he was a child, he remembers in the town where he grew up in the Beit Knesset, okay, he said I think it was on the ceiling of the Beit Knesset, they had pictures of the mazalot. They had pictures of the constellations. He said, I don't understand why it's allowed. Why should it be? But he says, nonetheless, he gives certain reasons. He says, I don't really understand the heter. If it was up to me, I wouldn't give the heter. But Hanach Le'am Yisrael, this is one of those things. Rabbi Wein once spoke about those stained glass windows and all the different images. Yeah, again, it's a related sugya, not quite the same thing. But similarly there, you see a similar phenomenon whereby the poskim were not so happy about it, but it's something which took hold in any event. So how can we justify the minhag of the gananot? That is our question of it. So essentially the main sugya in Rosh Hashanah, which talks about this, where it says, the Gemara asks this question, because on the one hand, we see you should not be making these images, and if they're 3D, then certainly worse, you should not be making them. But we find one of the great sages, no less than Rabban Gamliel, had images of the moon, different forms, different constellations, which he had up in his, he had a tavla, he had a table of them. So when the witnesses would come in for Kiddush HaChodesh, the witnesses would come in for the new moon, they would interrogate them, they would investigate the witnesses, and they would say you saw the moon, but was it like this or was it like that? And would show the different images. Again, it's implied there in the Gemara that it was something 3D as well. So how was Rabban Gamliel allowed to have these things? So a number of different answers are given in the Gemara. What seems to be the primary terutz is the fact that over there it was done in order to learn. It was done lahavin u'la'arot, in order to understand and in order to paskin halacha. If it's done for educational purposes, for purposes here of paskin halacha, to know if this was indeed the new moon and if they could do Kiddush HaChodesh, so for that reason it would be permitted. So going into our, right nowadays, we don't have Kiddush HaChodesh in that sense. We don't have, nobody's coming to give Eidut as such, but essentially three different directions, three grounds for leniency in terms of these drawings, in terms of these images of sun, moon, and heavenly bodies as such. So number one, which is brought in the poskim I've already mentioned, is the difference between 3D and 2D. Again, although most of the poskim seem to say even if it's 2D, even if it's a drawing, it would still be forbidden. That is the pshat in the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, most of the Rishonim. We do find, however, the Maharam Mirotenburg, who is a very significant Rishon, was the Rav of the Rosh, Rav Kook, actually in that Shuvah, where he says he's looking for a limud zchut, he says nonetheless, it may be a minority opinion, but they've got the Maharam Mirotenburg to rely on. There are worse people to rely on than the Maharam. The Maharam says that if it is a drawing, right, a drawing has got no mamashut, and therefore it would be permitted. He says it would be permitted in the case of a drawing. Again, many others disagree, but that is a Rishon that exists, that is one to rely on. Second ground for leniency is the following. The Ramah, when he brings this halacha, he quotes the Rambam in his Perush HaMishnayot, who seems to imply that the Issur would only apply if one was drawing the sun, moon, stars, etc., in such a way that it was in order to worship it. In such a way, the way that the idolaters, we've all seen the pictures of the sun god or whatever it is, things like that. But he says if you're just drawing a circle, which is the sun, or a circle, which is the moon, you're just drawing the sun or the moon as the sun or the moon, not as something which is worshipped, then he says it may be okay. So that's what's implied from the Rambam. That's what's implied from the Ramah as well. Again, there are many poskim who disagree. The Shach disagrees. The Vilna Gaon disagrees. Significant poskim. Primary reason why they disagree is because the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which speaks about Rabban Gamliel, and it says, how could Rabban Gamliel have these surot of the Levana, have these shapes of the moon? It gives an answer. It does not give the answer that, well, he just had the shapes of the moon as it appears, not the way that it is worshipped. So the pshat of the Gemara is that this is not a grounds for leniency, but nonetheless, that is another factor which the poskim bring, and they add, if it's drawn in such a way that it's not a realistic depiction, not a lifelike depiction. A teacher gives a sticker, in the shape of a star with the 5 points. It says "Kol hakavod." That's okay. Everybody knows that's not what a star actually looks like. Even though you say draw a star, that's what every child will do. But there's not what stars really look like in the heavenly bodies. So too, if it's a sun with a smiley face or something, presumably something which does not look like it's not a realistic depiction, that would be okay. And we'll skim out further that if it is not a complete image, here, by the way, there's actually a difference between the sun and the moon. When it comes to the moon, even if you were to draw the moon, a half moon, a crescent moon, as you see it, that is still a prohibition, even though it's only part of the moon, not the entire thing. Why? Because when we see the moon, that's what it looks like. We see part of it. But the sun and the stars and such, the prohibition would only be the entire depiction if it's just half of it. So you have many times, that's where it comes from. You have the sun, in the corner of the page, where it's just a quarter of or a semicircle or a quarter of a circle with the rays coming out, or you have behind the clouds. That everybody agrees that would be permitted. So leniency number one, we said we have the opinion of the Maharam, who says that just a drawing is okay. Again, minority opinion, but it is a factor. Opinion number two was that there are those who say that only if it's drawn in such a way that it's clear that it's shown it's a character to be worshipped. But if it's the actual sun or moon just as is, that would be okay. And an extension of that, if it's not a realistic depiction, or if it is not the entire sun, it's only part of it, then that would be fine as well. Okay, the third leniency, and this is really the primary one over here. And this is what the Gemara says at the end in the Sugya of Rosh Hashanah, says that if it was done for educational purposes, right? It was done in order to understand and in order to paskin halakha. So the question is, what does educational purposes mean? How far does this go? The Gemara said clearly what is permitted is educational purposes for paskin halakha for Kiddush HaChodesh. How far can we extend that? So educational purposes for learning about Torah in general, where there's no practical ramification halachically. Does it mean halachic educational purposes that are not related to Torah? If a person wants to learn astronomy, a person wants to learn about the stars, you're teaching the kids about space, but not in the context of Parshat Shavuot, right? Would that be permitted as well? So that is the third ground for leniency, which we have to understand how far the heter goes. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha אומר, הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל, לפי כך בא להם תורה מצוות, שניהם אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה.